Here's what most men will never say out loud. It's not her age that scares them, it's her power. It's the way she walks into a room without needing anyone's approval. It's the calm in her silence when something feels off. It's how she doesn't chase, doesn't flinch, and doesn't fall for the same tired tricks. She's been through too much to entertain half-effort love or breadcrumb attention. And that unshakable confidence, that ability to call out nonsense without raising her voice, that's what really makes her dangerous, in the most beautiful way. There's a reason some men feel unsettled in the presence of a confident older woman. It's not because she's doing anything wrong. It's because she walks into a room with the kind of energy that doesn't ask for attention, it commands it. And that confidence, that quiet power, reveals a truth many men aren't ready to confront. They're still questioning their own value. An older woman has lived through enough to no longer chase validation. She's not performing for approval or twisting herself to fit someone else's expectations. She knows what she brings to the table, and she doesn't need to advertise it with flashy behavior or excessive charm. Her confidence is grounded, effortless, and that can be deeply intimidating to someone still trying to figure out who they are. A man who isn't secure in himself might find that kind of woman overwhelming. He might say she's too much, or intense, or too independent. But what he's really saying is that he doesn't know how to hold his ground next to someone who doesn't need him to complete her. She doesn't look at a man as a savior, a rescuer, or a solution to her life. She looks at him as a partner, an equal. And sometimes that's scarier than someone who idolizes you. Because when you stand next to someone who truly values herself, you're forced to ask whether you value yourself in the same way. Her presence holds up a mirror, and in that reflection, some men see their insecurities laid bare. It's not about age, it's about energy. The energy of someone who's seen through illusions, broken patterns, and rebuilt her self-esteem through life's hard lessons. This kind of woman doesn't flinch when she's tested. She doesn't need to prove herself. And she's not afraid to say no. That level of composure, that calm refusal to play into emotional games or chase affection, disarms men who are used to holding control through uncertainty. If a man's charm has always been his superpower, and he meets someone who's immune to superficial flattery, he doesn't know how to respond. The usual tactics don't work. He can't bait her with inconsistency or draw her in with ambiguity. She's already decoded that language and learned it's a waste of time. So she walks away from confusion, and that's where the fear kicks in. Because suddenly he's no longer in control of the connection. Confidence in an older woman often comes with emotional clarity. She's had relationships, heartbreaks, wins, and growth. She doesn't see love as a game to win, but as a connection to protect. And a man who's still playing that game, still unsure, still hiding behind ego, feels that contrast. Her presence demands authenticity. You can't fake your way through a conversation with her, and you can't mask insecurity with surface-level charm. She sees right through it, and not because she's judging, but because she's already walked that path herself. That's what makes her so powerful, and what makes some men retreat. They're afraid of being seen, afraid of being measured against a standard of real maturity and self-acknowledge. And it's not because she sets that standard to intimidate anyone, it's just who she is now. She's not here to shrink, to soften her edges, or to dim her light to make someone else feel more comfortable. When a woman reaches a certain point in her life, after experiences, lessons, and personal growth, she no longer floats through relationships hoping someone will show her what she wants. She already knows. She knows what she wants in love, in partnership, in communication, and in how she wants to be treated. That clarity can be deeply confronting to a man who isn't sure of himself or what he can truly offer. It's one thing to enter a relationship where both people are still figuring it out together, and quite another to stand face to face with someone who's already done the work. An older woman doesn't hesitate to walk away from a connection that doesn't align with her standards. And for a man who's used to being pursued, forgiven too easily, or endlessly accommodated, that's a jarring shift in dynamic. She's not trying to impress anymore. She's not molding herself to fit a man's vision. She's already lived through the phase of asking, "Am I enough?" and has turned that question inside out. She's no longer looking for permission to be who she is. That sense of sureness is like a lighthouse. It illuminates everything around her, including any man who steps into her orbit. If his intentions are blurry, if he's unsure of his emotional availability, or if he's operating from a place of ego, he feels that light burn through his uncertainty. Not because she's trying to expose him, but because she's naturally moved beyond the fog of confusion that often surrounds dating dynamics. She wants clarity, effort, and truth, not potential. And the moment she feels like she's being fed potential instead of presence, she steps back. No drama, no ultimatum, just self-respect in action. That self-respect is something a lot of men aren't ready to come up against, because it means they can't coast. They can't play it casual for too long without losing her interest. They can't keep her emotionally invested with breadcrumbs. She doesn't have time for almost or someday. She's not looking to be convinced. She's not sitting around analyzing every message or reading between the lines to make excuses for a man's absence. She simply notices the inconsistency, feels the lack of alignment, and moves on. And for a man who's used to women fighting to stay, even when the relationship isn't healthy, that's a humbling experience. Older women tend to date with intentionality. They don't need to make everything serious immediately, but they're also not investing deeply in someone who isn't meeting them at the level they're ready for. That level of expectation doesn't come from entitlement, it comes from experience. From knowing what happens when you lower your standards for connection, when you ignore red flags, when you hope someone will change instead of honoring what's in front of you. And when a woman has learnt those lessons, she doesn't go backward. She holds the bar not to test a man, but to protect her own peace. And the men who aren't ready to meet her there often feel threatened by that strength, not because she's asking too much, but because they've never been required to show up fully before. A man who doesn't know what he wants will always fear a woman who does, because she represents the pressure to choose, to grow, to be real. And realness is intimidating when you're still hiding parts of yourself. So it's not her age that scares him, it's what her age represents. Wisdom, boundaries, presence, and the courage to walk away from anything that doesn't feel like love in its most grounded form. There's a certain kind of man who thrives in ambiguity, the one who sends mixed signals, who keeps a woman close enough to feel wanted but distant enough to avoid real commitment. For years he's operated in the grey area, where feelings aren't clearly defined, expectations aren't clarified, and intentions are left just vague enough to keep control. That's where he feels powerful, safe even. But when he encounters an older woman, that entire dynamic begins to unravel. Because she doesn't live in the grey anymore. She's lived through enough uncertainty to know it doesn't lead anywhere meaningful. She's no longer willing to be confused in the name of chemistry, or to be emotionally drained for the sake of keeping the peace. If a man can't be clear, she won't chase clarity, she'll simply exit. This is terrifying to someone who's used to holding the reins through silence or delay, because suddenly what once worked so effortlessly no longer has the same effect. She doesn't lean in with more effort when he pulls away. She doesn't sit around waiting for the next message or second guess herself. when the energy shifts. She notices it, recognizes the pattern, and calmly detaches. That's a fear for men who use emotional games as leverage. They're no longer in charge. Her ability to walk away without chaos or confrontation is unsettling. It means he no longer has the upper hand. He can't push and pull her like he used to with others who hadn't yet learned what inconsistency really means. An older woman has probably already played that game. She knows what it feels like to be ghosted, strung along, and emotionally invested in someone who never had the same depth of intention. And after all that, she's not bitter. She's just sharp. Her intuition is well trained now. She doesn't need weeks of confusion to know something's off. A delayed response, a shift in tone, a lack of presence. These things register quickly, and instead of analyzing them to death, she moves on. That's the kind of emotional intelligence that scares a man who still plays in the shadows, because to be with her he'd have to show up in full daylight, and he's not used to that. The tolerance for games becomes almost non-existent in women who've outgrown romantic chaos. They stop finding unpredictability exciting and start seeing it for what it is: emotional immaturity. She's not interested in guessing where she stands or decoding vague messages. She doesn't think someone being hot and cold is a sign of passion. It's a sign of someone who hasn't figured out how to regulate their own emotions. And when a man realizes that his old tactics won't hook her anymore, that his silence no longer creates desire but instead becomes a disqualifier, it shakes him. She's not waiting to be chosen, she's choosing. And that shift of power is massive. Because now, he's the one trying to figure out how to keep her engaged. But the only thing that works is consistency, presence, and emotional honesty. Things he might not be used to giving. She doesn't need over-the-top romance or dramatic gestures. She needs alignment. And when a man is not in alignment, she doesn't argue, explain, or beg for more. She lets go, not because she doesn't care, but because she's learned how much it costs to stay where she isn't emotionally safe. That refusal to play is what makes her both powerful and, to some men, frightening. Because it demands a different level of presence, not charm, not control, just truth. And not every man is ready to offer that. There's something deeply confronting about being seen, truly seen, not just admired for surface traits or praised for external achievements, but seen for who you are at your core. Older women have a way of doing that. They've developed a kind of emotional radar through years of experience. And when they engage with a man, they're not just looking at how he dresses or how confidently he speaks. They're paying attention to how he handles conflict, how he responds to discomfort, how deeply he listens, and whether he's present or just pretending to be. This level of awareness puts pressure on a man to step into emotional depth, and for many, that's terrifying. Not because she's asking too much, but because no one's ever required it before. Many men have spent a lifetime being rewarded for surface-level effort. They've been taught that success in dating comes from looking good, saying the right things, being funny, being charming. But when they come face to face with a woman who's evolved beyond the stage of falling for appearances, the rules change. Charm alone doesn't carry weight anymore. She's not swayed by a clever pickup line or impressed by vague promises. She needs presence, emotional maturity, the ability to have hard conversations without shutting down. And not every man has developed that capacity. So instead of rising to meet that challenge, some retreat, because it's easier to say she's too deep or too serious than to admit they don't know how to meet her in that space. Older women often bring emotional intelligence that's been shaped through real-life lessons, breakups that forced self-reflection, career challenges that demanded resilience, moments of vulnerability that built strength. They don't just ask, "What do you do for a living?" They ask questions that matter. What drives you? What scares you? What are you avoiding in your life? And those questions pierce through the armor. They force a man to evaluate himself beyond the external. For someone who's not used to looking inward, this can feel invasive, but it's not interrogation, it's intimacy. Real, uncomfortable, vulnerable intimacy. And that's something many men crave, but haven't been taught how to navigate. So instead of leaning in, they freeze. What makes this even more complicated is that an older woman usually doesn't have time for emotional babysitting. She's not looking to teach someone how to open up or beg someone to be honest. She can hold space for imperfection, but she's not interested in dragging someone toward growth. She wants to grow together, not carry someone, and that's the difference. She may be nurturing, but she's not going to mother a man through his avoidance. And when that realization sets in, that he has to meet her where she is, emotionally and mentally, or lose the opportunity, he's either inspired to rise or tempted to run. Because now the spotlight is on him. Not his looks, not his charm, not his status. Him, the real, vulnerable, imperfect man underneath it all. Some men find that terrifying, not because they lack the desire to connect, but because they've never had to do it at this level. Being with a woman who's emotionally evolved is like standing in front of a mirror that reflects not only your strengths, but also your shadows. And she doesn't shame you for them. She just won't let you pretend they aren't there. That's what makes her powerful. That's why some men fear her. Not because she's older, but because she challenges them to become someone better, someone more self-aware, more grounded, more present. And not everyone is ready for that kind of growth. There comes a point in a woman's life when she stops handing out access to her heart so freely. She's been through enough to know what emotional exhaustion feels like, what it costs to constantly pour into someone who doesn't know how to give back, and how dangerous it is to mistake intensity for connection. That's why older women carry emotional boundaries that are often mistaken for coldness, but in reality they're a form of deep self-preservation. She's not bitter, she's discerning. She's no longer willing to allow someone into her space if they're going to chip away at her peace or destabilize the calm she's worked so hard to build. And for a man who's used to women seeking validation through his attention, that emotional strength can feel like a wall he doesn't know how to climb. This is where fear begins to creep in for men who rely on being needed as a way to feel important, because she doesn't need fixing, and she doesn't look to him to rescue her from her emotions. She's learned how to sit with her own feelings, how to process them, how to comfort herself. That inner stability shifts the dynamic completely. She's not here to lose herself in someone else. She's not giving away her identity in hopes that love will validate it. And for men who subconsciously seek control by becoming a woman's emotional center, this becomes a threat. They don't know how to function in a relationship where they're not the sun everything else orbits around. There's a particular power in a woman who can enjoy someone's presence but never depend on it for survival. She likes him, she may even care deeply, but she's not afraid to walk away if she senses that the relationship is costing her more than it's giving. She's willing to leave the table if respect disappears, if emotional effort drops, or if her values start being compromised. And that's a level of self-respect that demands to be met, not manipulated. So when a man comes in expecting her to bend, to chase, or to prove herself worthy of his time, he's often met with silence. Not because she doesn't feel anything, but because she's already chosen herself. This creates a sharp contrast for a man who thrives off of emotional dependency. If he's used to women who tie their self-worth to how much affection they receive from him, her emotional independence feels like rejection. But it's not rejection, it's balance. She's not afraid to open up, but she's also not handing over the keys to her emotional world without trust. She's careful, not because she's wounded, but because she knows what it takes to rebuild herself from the ground up. That knowledge changes how she gives love. She doesn't give it all away at once. She gives it slowly, intentionally, and only to those who can handle it with care. When a man meets a woman who doesn't need him to feel whole, he's forced to confront a deeper question. What is he bringing to the table besides being available? If she's already fulfilled emotionally, spiritually, socially, then he's not entering her life as a savior, he's entering as a contributor. And that's where the fear lies for many men, because if she doesn't need saving, then they can't feel superior by being the one who provides salvation. That kind of dynamic doesn't allow ego to lead. It requires mutual effort, mutual growth, mutual giving. And if he's not prepared to meet her at that level, he often walks away telling himself she was too guarded or too distant, when really she just knew how to protect her energy. There's a hidden pressure many men carry that rarely gets talked about. The need to feel like they're leading, guiding, or in control in a relationship. Not in an overbearing or toxic way, but in a deeply rooted belief that their value comes from being the provider of answers, the one who knows, the one who teaches or influences. But when a man meets an older woman who is already deeply rooted in who she is, who has her own wisdom, who doesn't need direction but perhaps only companionship, this foundational sense of value can feel threatened. She doesn't require him to lead her. She doesn't lean on him to validate her decisions. She has her own voice, and more importantly, she trusts it. And that's where the fear begins. An older woman often brings a kind of inner authority that doesn't ask for permission. She's been through the fires of doubt and second-guessing. She's fallen for the wrong people, learned from it, and made peace with her mistakes. She doesn't need someone to tell her what's best for her life. She already knows. And if she doesn't know in a moment, she's confident enough to figure it out on her own. For a man who's internalized the belief that his worth is tied to how much he can guide or help a woman, her independence creates a kind of identity crisis. If he's not teaching her something, solving her problems, or leading the way, then what is he offering? And if he hasn't yet developed emotional depth or relational maturity, that question can make him shrink instead of grow. She's not challenging his masculinity, she's simply not dependent on it. And that can be one of the most disorienting realizations for a man who's always been praised for taking charge. Now he's dealing with a woman who's already navigated career challenges, made major life decisions, processed loss, and built her own coping strategies. She doesn't need fixing, she needs partnership. And the kind of partnership she's looking for requires a man to be okay with not always having the final say. It requires emotional flexibility, humility, and the ability to collaborate without feeling diminished. And for many men, especially those not yet used to that level of balance, it's unfamiliar territory. What really unsettles some men is that she asks different questions. She's not impressed by status, titles, or how much someone earns. She wants to know what a man believes in, what he stands for, how he treats people when no one's watching, whether he can communicate his needs without shutting down or lashing out. These aren't the questions of someone who needs protection. They're the questions of someone who's building a conscious connection. And when a man isn't used to being asked to show up emotionally, that invitation feels like a demand. She's not trying to test him. She's trying to build something real. But if he's not ready to step into that kind of relationship, her presence feels like pressure instead of peace. What he may not realize is that she's not asking for dominance or control. She's not competing with him. She's simply asking him to stand beside her, not above her. And that subtle shift in power, where both people are equals, can feel foreign to someone conditioned to lead from a place of ego rather than authenticity. She's not threatened by his power, but she won't shrink herself to protect it. And that, more than anything, forces a man to look inward, to ask himself whether he's grown enough to love someone who doesn't need him, but chooses him. That's a kind of love that requires evolution. It's not built on dependence or hierarchy, but on mutual respect and inner strength. And not every man is ready for that kind of love. So here's the truth most won't say out loud. Men aren't afraid of older women because of their age. They're afraid of what that age represents. It's not the number, it's the power behind it. It's the clarity, the emotional intelligence, the unapologetic standards, and the quiet refusal to entertain anything less than what aligns with peace. Older women don't just bring experience, they bring presence. They've loved, lost, healed, and learned. They don't beg to be seen because they see themselves, and that self-awareness demands a different kind of man. Not one who's just charming, but one who's real, consistent and grounded enough to meet her where she already stands. What some men secretly fear is not rejection, but reflection. When they stand in front of a woman who has outgrown games, who doesn't mistake silence for mystery or confusion for chemistry, they're forced to confront who they really are. She doesn't fight for attention, she embodies it. She doesn't chase, she attracts. And she doesn't lower her standards to be loved, she raises her energy until the right kind of love meets her there. That's the truth behind the fear. It's not that she's older, it's that she's evolved. And evolution always demands the same thing from anyone who wants to walk beside it: growth.